Let's talk about the best teams in the country right now. It's time for our power rankings presented by Citi. Listen, it is the midseason, so we're just going straight power rankings. We are ranking the best teams in the country right now. This doesn't quite match the AP poll, but this is how I see it right now. Texas number 1, Oregon number 2, Ohio State number 3. Didn't drop them after losing the 2-3 game. I still think they're one of the best teams in the country. Georgia at 4, Penn State at 5. I will say 4 and 5 was a tough decision because Penn State's unbeaten, but I don't know, for some of the reasons you outlined a little earlier, Joshua, about just like what their ceiling is this season. But it's a fair argument to have about the number 1 spot too. I saw a lot of people who are very mixed on this because Oregon has the best win in the country now, but Texas has been so dominant and does look like so well-rounded that I kept them in the top spot.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? And like, just in terms of the AP poll, I kind of hate the way that polling works and how they move teams around based off of the results. Like it's mind-boggling to me, neither here nor there. I have no problem with Texas in that number 1 spot. I do think Oregon has an extremely strong case based off of the result against Ohio State. I think that there are other people that will say, well, it's hard for me to do that when I watched what Oregon looked like at the beginning of the season. And even though they do have the best win, it was just a 1-point win, right? Like you have that back and forth there, and I get it. I don't necessarily agree with all of it, but I understand it. So 1, 2, I'm perfectly fine. You got 3 right. It's the thing that I feel like the AP does not get right. Like just because Penn State won in a game that was, it wasn't a great win if you look at the totality of the game. And Ohio State goes on the road and loses to now what is the number 2 team in the country by 1 point. Like, I do think that you would look at that game and say that we watched 2 of the best teams in the country.
Yes.
Ohio State should be penalized, but not massively so. The Penn State-Georgia thing is fun because we talked about both of these teams already. I think they're both very flawed football teams. I think it's also very clear that they are a couple of the best teams in the country. This is a year that we're living in college football. Again, Penn State, I'm just really struggling there. So I can't argue with this, even though I do know Georgia has like some issues. I'm just not at the trust Penn State stage of the season.
But it's wild because we both just did our midseason CFP brackets as well, which you can find on NBCsports.com. It's so hard to sort through the teams that are like outside of the top 3 through like 15 to figure out, okay, who would be getting at large spots, who's better than who, because and I know we've kind of talked about the parity in college football over the last few years and the portal era, but like the top to the middle of like, let's say like the top 20, top 30 teams feels closer than it's been in other years, which it speaks to your point about like some of these teams that are ranked very highly actually have some significant flaws, feel like they could lose more frequently than maybe a top 5 team in years past, but that's kind of where we are this year.
I like it. It's a little disconcerting, honestly, because I do think that we're so used to the era of like dominant teams and no parity. And so it is weird to kind of like be on edge watching a lot of these games. I'm not even supposed to be emotionally invested in any of them, but I love the sport that much that I'm on edge. But I think it shapes up for the first year where we do have 12 teams that it should be this competitive. I would have been pissed off otherwise. And so I think that's been a nice little gift for us.